Nietzsche once wrote, "The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die." Most men never cast their skin. They just keep thinking about it. You know the type, maybe you are the type. Sharp enough to see every angle of a problem, smart enough to talk yourself out of every solution. That's not intelligence. That's a trap. And today we're going to show you exactly how it kills you. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact psychological mechanism that turns a sharp mind into a prison, why Nietzsche identified overthinking as a symptom of weakness, not strength, and the one shift that separates men who think clearly from men who just think constantly. Here's why this matters right now. The average man in 2024 has more information, more self-awareness, more access to philosophy and psychology than any generation before him, and he's doing less with it than any generation before him. Anxiety is up. Decisiveness is down. Men are more educated about their trauma than they are free from it. Knowing the name of your wound is not the same as healing it. Nietzsche saw this coming 140 years ago. He called it paralysis of the will, and he said it was more dangerous than ignorance, because at least ignorance moves. Overthinking is not a sign of intelligence, it's a defense mechanism against risk. Consider Hamlet. Shakespeare's Hamlet is arguably the most famous overthinker in Western literature, a man so philosophically sophisticated he can articulate every reason to act and every reason not to. His father is murdered. The murderer is named. The path is clear. And yet Hamlet spends 5 acts inside his own skull. By the time he finally moves, everyone he loves is dead. Nietzsche would have recognized Hamlet immediately, not as a tragic hero, but as a cautionary archetype. A man who used thought as a substitute for courage. The psychological mechanism here is what modern researchers call analysis paralysis, but Nietzsche framed it more brutally: when a man lacks the will to act, his mind generates infinite reasons to delay. It feels like wisdom. It presents itself as caution. But underneath it is fear dressed in intellectual clothing. The more sophisticated the mind, the more convincing the costume. Your brain isn't protecting you, it's protecting your ego from the possibility of failure. Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment, the overthinker's secret poison. Think about the guy you know who is incredibly smart, can dissect any situation with surgical precision, remembers every slight, every injustice, every moment he was underestimated, and yet somehow never builds anything. He spends his energy cataloging what was done to him rather than deciding what he'll do next. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere in 19th-century European culture and named it ressentiment, a French word he used deliberately, because it means more than resentment. It means a festering, internalized reliving of grievance that masquerades as moral superiority. Here's the mechanism: the overthinker loops. He replays conversations, refines his arguments, constructs the perfect response to something that happened 3 years ago. This feels productive, it feels like processing. But what it actually does is burn the fuel he needs for forward movement on the fire of the past. Every hour spent perfecting your understanding of why you were wronged is an hour not spent building something that makes the grievance irrelevant. Nietzsche's prescription wasn't forgiveness, it was contempt for the loop itself. Break the cycle not because it's kind, but because staying in it makes you weak. The will to power is not about domination, it's about overcoming the committee in your own head. Most people misread Nietzsche's will to power as some kind of social Darwinism, the strong dominating the weak. That's the lazy reading, and it misses the entire point. Nietzsche's real target was internal. He was talking about the war inside a man between the part that wants to create, build, and risk and the part that wants to stay safe, be liked, and avoid embarrassment. The composer Beethoven going deaf and continuing to write symphonies he would never hear, that is will to power. Not conquest. Self-overcoming. The mechanism is this: every man has a committee inside his head. Old voices, parents, teachers, ex-girlfriends, that one boss who told you weren't management material. The overthinker treats this committee like a board he has to get approval from before he acts. The Nietzschean move is to dissolve the committee entirely. Not to override them, to stop recognizing their authority. The question stops being what will they think and becomes what do I judge worthy? That shift is not arrogance. It's the foundation of actual self-possession. Constant self-analysis erodes identity. Nietzsche called it becoming a ghost of yourself. There's a specific type of man who has done so much therapy, read so much self-help, attended so many retreats, that he now exists primarily as an observer of himself rather than a participant in his own life. He has a vocabulary for everything he feels. He can trace every behavior back to a childhood wound with impressive accuracy. But watch him make a decision, any decision, and you'll see the problem. He can't. Because every time he reaches for an identity, he immediately deconstructs it. But is that really me, or is that conditioning? That question, repeated indefinitely, doesn't lead to authenticity. It leads to a man who has no center. Nietzsche's insight was that identity is not something you uncover, it's something you forge through committed action. You don't find out who you are by thinking about it. You find out by doing something hard and seeing what you're made of. The man who never commits to a direction because he's still figuring himself out at 38 isn't being thorough. He's avoiding the verdict. Because action renders a verdict, it shows you what you actually value when there's skin in the game. Thinking costs nothing. That's exactly the problem. Nietzsche's amor fati, the overthinker's antidote, isn't positivity, it's total ownership. Late in his life, Nietzsche developed one of his most useful ideas, amor fati, love of fate. Not acceptance. Not resignation. Love. The idea that everything that has happened to you, every failure, every embarrassment, every wasted year, is not baggage to analyze endlessly, it's material to build from. Marcus Aurelius touched the same idea in Meditations when he wrote that the obstacle becomes the way. But Nietzsche went further, don't just use the obstacle. Be glad it exists. The man who can look at his worst years and say that made me exactly who I needed to become is not lying to himself. He is refusing to be a victim of his own history. The mechanism is a fundamental reorientation of the relationship between thinking and living. The overthinker uses his past as evidence for why the future is uncertain or dangerous. Amor fati flips this completely, the past becomes fuel, not weight. When you stop trying to analyze your way to a different history and start asking, given exactly what happened, what is possible now, the cognitive energy you were burning on regret becomes available for construction. This is not a motivational trick. It is a structural change in how your mind processes time. Let's bring this back to 3 things you can carry out of here. 1. Overthinking is not a sign of a sharp mind, it is a sign of a mind that has learned to use sophistication as a shield against risk. Recognize it for what it is. 2. Nietzsche's will to power is about the internal war, specifically, the war against the committee of borrowed voices that demand approval before you act. Dissolve the committee. 3. Amor fati is the practical exit ramp from the loop. You don't need a different past. You need a different relationship to the one you have. The man who can do that doesn't think less, he thinks with direction. There's a difference between a mind that is sharp and a mind that is aimed. Aim yours. If this landed for you, subscribe, we drop one of these every Tuesday and Friday. No padding, no fluff, just philosophy that actually cuts. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it, and if you know someone who's been living inside his own head for too long, send him this video. It might be the thing that breaks the loop.